and welcome to Inside Edition. We're going to discuss national and regional issues in depth. Today we will be discussing the ambitious vision of the Gulf Cooperation Council to activate its role in the region with political analyst and researcher Mr. Mahmoud Abdel Ghaffar. We will also review GCC's success in having a more proactive role to serve the development of the Arabian Gulf. But first, let's look at this report.
May 25th of 1981 marked the official initiation of the Gulf Cooperation Council, bringing together the Arabian Gulf countries in joint action out of their awareness of their special relations, common characteristics and similar ruling policies based on mutual religion and traditions. The GCC states managed to make great accomplishments by bolstering cooperation and integration among member states in different fields, ranging from politics, economy, defense and security, and by harnessing efforts and capabilities to back international causes and brotherly and friendly countries.
I'm very much in favor of regional cooperation, because this is absolutely what you need, because the region is in turmoil. There are some strategic threats, and you need to cooperate in order to get things right in this part of the world. You face huge challenges and you have to deal with them, and that can only be done through cooperation.
The Kingdom of Bahrain is a key member of the GCC that continues to interact with regional international issues in a way that contribute to the development of the Council's march. Such relations among the GCC states, with their shared deep-rooted history, contributed to launching a strategic partnership that strengthens them politically and economically and makes them more capable of influencing the global decision-making process within a unified entity. The role of this entity is undeniable, as the GCC is not a bystander when it comes to regional and international security. GCC has always had this mark in the region, as it has always been part of all initiatives and efforts to deal with the fast-paced developments across the area, to enhance joint cooperation and coordination in the face of all threats and challenges, in addition to achieving the best interests of all countries. Regarding its regional role, the GCC policy towards crises in the region from Yemen, Libya and Iraq to Syria is based on clear principles, with the top priority being the preservation of security and stability of Arab countries and standing beside them in their efforts to realize interests of their peoples and serve their aspirations through development, stability and progress.
Welcome back. Joining us in the studio now is Mr. Mahmoud Abdel Ghaffar. Thank you for being a guest on our show.
Yeah.
After watching this report, how do you evaluate the GCC's challenges that are facing them, and how will they deal with these regional challenges?
Well, you see, the GCC actually is very accustomed to becoming a security guarantor within the region. Of course, the GCC itself was established in 1981, but the actual defense command, or the efforts to build a common defense force, was created in 1984. So, and their experiences extend for almost 30 years now. The GCC actually deployed 3,000 troops to liberate Kuwait during the operation there. And again, they were called up again in 2003 to secure Kuwait's border, and I believe they deployed around 10,000 troops and 2 ships to maintain the maritime sovereignty of Kuwait, a very key ally within the GCC, of course, as well. And then again in December 13th, 2013, we actually developed a joint military command as the next step to develop defense force cooperation between the 6 GCC member states. And in this regard, as actually in 2016, under the leadership of Saudi Arabia, we've underwent a tremendous military drill known as Northern Thunder, which involved all GCC states, and with a total of 21 countries participating in the exercise. And this has actually never occurred before in the GCC on this scale. So you can see we've actually becoming a lot more pragmatic and self-reliant in our defense needs. And this is actually coincides with the direction that the world is heading now. We are becoming a lot more multipolar world where we have much more regional actors becoming involved in the affairs of their specific regions. So there's a lot more dependency on regional actors to step up and take a role within our affairs, and that's exactly what the GCC is doing. And you can see these developments occurring in the past 10 years, and all the actions that the GCC have been taking are actually reflecting this reality now.
I mean, the challenges that you mentioned now are pertaining mostly to the security.
Yes.
Are there any other challenges that might be facing the GCC?
Of course, I mean, you always have the energy file. It's very important now. In the past couple years now, you can see that oil prices have dropped tremendously. And this just goes to show that OPEC may not have the same clout as they used to. Now we have the shale revolution occurring in the US and other areas. And we're getting more producers on the field, and maybe now the oil prices might fluctuate even more. And of course, in this regard, this actually affects the GCC directly because it's a global market, and the GCC is part of this global market as they're one of the main suppliers for energy around the world. And also on the economic side, there's been a lot of backlash, as you could say, towards more globalized endeavors and international organizations. We see the reactions to the EU and how different countries are not happy with their policies, and you see different calls to actually be a little bit more isolationist, especially in the US now with the election of Donald Trump, who is now going to be the 45th president of the United States. There's a slight retreat from the international field. This is because it's a reaction to all the developments that have been taking place for the past 30 years in terms of globalization. And this actually puts the GCC in a very precarious situation because there's a lot of uncertainty going forward.
Yes. You mentioned something very important. I mean, the EU Council's decisions have been always been impacted because of their relationships also between the separate countries. Is that something that will affect the GCC Council or the Union, the deep-rooted relations between the GCC countries?
Well, the GCC will definitely look to the EU in terms of how to further develop a supernatural organization. That is an organization that transcends borders. And then when you look at the EU for this example, you can look at what they do good and their mistakes that they make. And so actually the GCC is in a very good situation to learn from others as well. And we can't also forget about organizations in Asia such as the ASEAN organization, and they've also been a model that the GCC strives to learn from as well. So of course the world is a lot more connected now, even if there's a populace that might not like the situation as well. So this is unavoidable, to be honest too.
All right. Now, the upcoming GCC summit is to be held next month, the GCC summit is going to be held next month and is set to further expand fields of cooperation among the member states. Can you tell us about the importance of holding the GCC summit? Even previously, we've seen a lot of decisions have come out of those, but right now in the depth, or we're just in the face of a lot of challenges. I mean, war, economic issues. How important is a summit like this right now?
Oh, these summits are paramount, I would say. And not only because where the GCC is developing as an organization, but also for the greater region, because there's a lot of uncertainty now. And actually it's very interesting that Bahrain is playing a pivotal role within supporting a GCC union policies, because Bahrain actually has very long history in alliance management and alliance building. This spans for over hundreds of years now. And actually Bahrain is relying on this experience and their cordial relations with all the GCC states and regional neighbors as well to really push forward the GCC union. So now it's coming at a very pivotal role because the uncertainty has skyrocketed for the past 10 years. And in order to create appropriate policies between the 6 GCC member states, it's actually important to streamline how to develop these policies in the first place. And the GCC union, while it might be comprehensive at times, it actually help ensure that all the 6 GCC member states are able to pursue their interests in a very meaningful way between all the members.
Have all 6 countries always been part of the summits?
Well, they've always had a presence, obviously, but maybe at different levels in terms of their protocols. But obviously, all the members will be there, and they'll all eyes and ears will be very wide open to see how the summit develops and what are the resolutions that will come out or any decisions. Because in the end, this will affect all the countries. And while it's actually a very strong point that we have a very common history that is intertwined and ancient in nature, and common language and religion as well plays a very strong aspect that we are able to communicate with each other on such a deep and intimate level. This may not be the case for other regions. For instance, in Europe, you have a lot of different languages and cultures, yes, but they're able to set aside these differences and communicate on a level that makes sense to all of them. Whereas for the GCC, we all have this common background now, so we can actually use this as a strength to forward creating a union between the 6 states as well.
Great. Now that we've identified the challenges with you, Mr. Abdel Ghaffar, we're now going to turn to Mrs. Shinzia Bianco, an analyst for Eurogulf Information Center and a PhD candidate at the University of Exeter. Hello, Ms. Bianco. How are you?
Hello to you. I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
I'm great. How do you see the GCC's role in dealing with regional challenges?
Well, actually, a stronger GCC could definitely be more able to face up to the challenges that the region is going through. It's a quite unstable period for the whole world, definitely, but in particular for the region, it seems that each state is going through a number of threats and challenges. Mm-hmm. So I would say that a stronger GCC is definitely more able to face up to these challenges. At the same time, as we all know, there are challenges in creating stronger multilateral bodies. And although I do agree with what my colleague was saying before, that definitely the region shares strong historical and identity bonds, so it is set on the path to create a successful multilateral, stronger body. At the same time, there are challenges that need to be carefully thought through.
Yes. Ms. Bianco, you mentioned a stronger GCC. Does that pertain to the security issue?
Can you say it again, sorry?
You were talking about a stronger GCC. Does that also pertain to the security challenges? Is it the stronger security that is needed?
Yes. A stronger GCC, what I mean is a stronger bond among the GCC countries. So even more cooperation in the terms of security, as well as in political initiatives, as well as in economic initiatives. So my idea when I say stronger is more coordinated, more united.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Ms. Bianco, we talked about the challenges with Mr. Abdel Ghaffar, and the number one challenge that seems to cover everything is always the security challenges that are facing the region. Can you give us your opinion on that?
It's tough to say what is number one, because they are all very much intertwined. There's definitely the strong challenge and threat coming from Iranian interference in the region. At the same time, the disintegration of the state system is a very big challenge for the GCC governments, which are, as we know, an island of stability in a region that is basically disintegrating state structures. And at the same time, also the threat coming from terrorism and terrorist groups, and the fact that they have the power to attract recruits from all around the region, including the GCC countries, is a terrible concern. The sectarianism, which can raise the temperature within the national societies of the GCC countries, is also a very big concern. Unfortunately, we live in a time where there are many threats that are coming from several directions, and they are all intertwined. Because if I could point to one, it is the disintegration of the state system that it seems to me the biggest one, because it's what encourages, on one hand, the interference of Iran into trying to take advantage of this disintegration to extend its own influence, but it is also what encourages terrorist groups to try with violence to even disintegrate the system even more and try to carve out whatever power they can do from that. And it is what is disappointing citizens and raising the sectarian tensions inside states, of course, more so in the neighboring countries such as Iraq.
Neighboring countries is actually what I want to talk about. I mean, these interferences from Iran and the militias that are available. The war in Yemen has taken a very big toll on the GCC.
Yes, absolutely. The war in Yemen is a huge challenge for the GCC. It's one of the very first times that the GCC countries are actively engaged in a conflict, and it seems very complicated in terms of its political and diplomatic shape. There have been initiatives, and GCC countries have been very active in trying to support them. There is little doubt to me that Saudi Arabia and the other GCC countries would definitely like to get to a negotiated solution as soon as possible. At the same time, there is a lot at stake, and it's tough for the GCC countries and for Saudi Arabia in particular to agree to a solution that would be perceived as a defeat. And hence why the situation is very complex in Yemen, and it seems tough to get to a negotiated solution in a short period of time. At the same time, the GCC leaders ask themselves how much they want to go on, how much longer they want to go on with the conflict. And the answer is nobody really wants to go on with the conflict, because they all understand that more wars and more prolonged wars can actually trigger more instability at the borders. So it is quite a sensitive situation.
Yes. Ms. Bianco, before I let you go, my question to you is, the GCC has been discussing the move from a council to a union. There are a lot of discussions going on about that. How would such a move transform the Arabian Gulf?
Sorry, can you repeat?
How would such a move help in transforming the Arabian Gulf and its visions and its policies and so on?
That would be very transforming. That would definitely turn the GCC into a stronger actor, a more powerful actor in regional terms, and that would also, if successful, put in line different at the time diverging at some time perceptions and policy lines. So that would definitely it would create a very strong counterbalance to Iran, and it would remain to be seen if that would be perceived by Iran as a constructive or a destructive mode, and hence why it would encourage more aggressive or less aggressive behavior. But in general terms, it would be very, very transformative. Definitely, the challenge in Yemen, I think, would be the war in Yemen would be, I think, the first scenario that would be affected, because there it would definitely encourage all actors on the ground, including the rebels, the Houthi, to subdue to their aspirations and aggressive intentions quickly. That I would think is the first scenario that would be affected.
Yes. Thank you, Ms. Bianco, for your insight and for joining us. And that was Ms. Shindia Bianco, an analyst for Eurogulf Information Center and a PhD candidate at the University of Exeter. Returning back to the studio, Mr. Abdel Ghaffar, Ms. Bianco had a very much to say, and some of the points were emphasized that you said yourself, but she went more in depth when it comes to the interferences from outside. Now, when she talks about Iraq, about Yemen, about the interferences here locally in the GCC, we always see one name behind it. Iran is always behind it, and there are always interferences. Your comments, please, about that.
Well, I mean, Iraq, since the 1979 revolution, has actually mandated that exporting the revolution is at the forefront of its constitution, and it's part of its identity and ideology. While some have actually argued that it's pursuing more of a pragmatic approach, where it's relying more on militias to carry out its interests in different countries. And this is actually a much more cost-effective solution for them, which they can influence 100%. You see this in Iraq, you see this in Syria, you see this in Yemen, and there are even reports that it's occurring in Bahrain as well. And this is very clear that they're actually pursuing Iranian interests in different countries. And of course, it's a lot easier to put a barrier between yourself as Iran. So if you're involved as a proxy on behalf of Iran, there's a barrier, so it cannot lead directly back to you. And actually, we've seen the full blossoming of the proxy project in Lebanon, where Lebanon and Hezbollah now is a formidable political player and a military player within the country, and the country's future actually has a lot to depend on this terrorist organization. So you can see that this development is actually within the lines of Iranian ideology, and also that is supported within its constitution.
Now let's talk about the solution. Ms. Bianco had some views on the GCC joint effort, and part of them were that basically first Yemen is going to be, the problem in Yemen is going to be faced, and hence the other one. So what is your response to Ms. Bianco's views?
Well, obviously Yemen is more directly involved with all the GCC states to certain degrees, of course. So obviously in the medium to short term, this is actually the solution that every actor on the ground wants to create a resolution for. They want to negotiate, they want a political settlement for the conflict, because as Ms. Bianca said, the conflict is dragging on, and the more it drags on, the more it will enter a quagmire state, which is prolonged conflict, which will increase the instability in the region. And you see this now. We have Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula now is becoming a lot more formidable player again. And you see Daesh, which is having a lot more influence in the region as well. Yes. And but actually what's interesting about the Yemen case is that the country has always been divided along tribal lines. So the effects of proxies actually can be counterbalanced if the regional players implement policies to actually attain stability. So that's an advantage over it. Well, of course, you also have the question of governance post-conflict. You know, what will be the Yemen's future? What will occur within the political sphere? How will different parties interact with each other? How will the interests be defined for these countries? So, of course, a GCC union will want to tackle Yemen immediately, because it affects all the countries in the short and medium term, and prolonging the conflict will also prolong the instability in the region. And Yemen, of course, has a very long border with Saudi Arabia. So any acts to create stability in Yemen will, of course, create stability for Saudi Arabia and its borders.
As a union, they would be able to basically solve all of the problems that might face post-war, pre-war, during war, and everything.
Well, you will hope so, of course, you know. But of course, it's a very long, complicated process when it comes to any sort of military conflict. And then you see it's very multifaceted. It involves many different players. Represents different interests from different sides. So, but having a union, a common international body within the region actually will help streamline these processes. The countries can better create policies to pursue their interests in a more streamlined vision, and actually will create a counterweight to Iranian expansionist agendas in the region, which has been actually forecasted to increase after the nuclear accord that was signed.
Yes, yes. The Gulf Cooperation Council, the council itself, not the Gulf countries, they enjoy a very friendly relationship with all the countries, a friendship or a relationship that is based on respect, on cooperation. How does the council itself push forward these ties?
In terms of developing into deeper relations, well, I mean, the GCC have always understood the significance of their location. They're situated between the ancient crown of the British Empire, which was India, and it's always been the segue towards that key interest for the British Empire. So obviously the historical importance of the Gulf cannot be underestimated. So obviously the world is very much interested in the Gulf region, so maintaining very strong cordial relations is very important for all the GCC states. And this is why they don't take lightly to any interventions from Iran as well, because it upsets the balance within this region that is not only a region for the regional actors, but also for the international community as well, because of the significance of oil, of its geo-economic location. So obviously pursuing different alliances on an international regional level is very critical for the GCC states. So they will always look for any opportunities to further develop their relations with the world.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Now, regional security is one of the main challenges we are currently facing, and the Gulf Cooperation Council has exerted tremendous efforts to deal with it. Let's take a look at the entity's work in this regard.
The Gulf Cooperation Council has taken many courageous steps by exerting tremendous efforts to maintain the security and stability of the region. Most notable example is the Arab coalition led by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to restore the legitimacy and security of Yemen. Their involvement in the US-led international coalition against Daesh, in addition to forming a 34-nation coalition to combat regional terrorist threats.
So there's always been a strategic and a security-related aspect to the GCC. I think even more important than the economic side. And they had been planning and developing interoperable technologies as well as structures so that their military forces can be combined if the need ever came, and they could work together for collective defense. Essentially, in 2011, for the very first time, the Operation Peninsular Shield Force was established and went into action when it became clear that it wasn't just demonstrations here, but also the hand of Iran. And I think that the GCC played a fantastic role in ensuring that Iran was going to be deterred and wouldn't try to actually get physically involved in Bahrain directly.
The latest coordinated and unified stance taken by the GCC countries towards many pressing issues and files send a clear message that the GCC countries are capable of defending their interests and gains of their peoples and have the will of taking effective action against any threats to their security. They have a great responsibility to preserve regional security and stability and stand united against plots of chaos and destructions that some of the countries are going through. The question now is what is next for the Gulf Cooperation Council regarding regional security? What should such a strong unified entity do to deal with and overcome the challenges it is facing?
Welcome back. Mr. Abdel Ghaffar, after seeing this report, we see that the GCC is, the role that they play is defending the region is undeniable. What is your view about the war over the legitimacy in Yemen?
Well, the whole Yemen conflict is deeply rooted in legitimacy. The Arab coalition actually is striving to restore the legitimate and internationally recognized government of Yemen back into the country. So legitimacy is at the forefront of the conflict itself. And it's very unfortunate that certain players have actually tried to usurp this notion, especially with the assistance of foreign intervention within the Yemeni political sphere as well. So we see this with Iran actually creating very solid ties with different Houthi elements, with different militant elements, and they're actually coordinating their interests for the advancement of not only the Houthis, but as well for creating a stronger footprint of Iranian intervention in Yemen itself. And Yemen itself is actually, it's located in a very strategic location where you have Bab al-Mandeb, which is the main channel to access the Red Sea and Suez Canal. And but unfortunately, we see within the international community that some critics, you will say, have actually been criticizing the efforts that could lead to a political solution for Yemen itself. And it's unfortunate that when you have as well on the aid deliveries units, and how the Arab coalition is actually striving to get different aid into the country, but it's not possible because different interfering elements are actually blocking any aid shipment in this capacity. And as well, you also have the different political efforts to reconcile or to create a political solution for Yemen itself. So legitimacy is very deeply shrouded within the Yemeni conflict as well. And it's also to safeguard the borders of the GCC states and the region as well.
These critics, it would seem logical that the GCC would want to defend its borders. And
Yes.
as you mentioned before, Yemen has a very big borderline with Saudi Arabia, with Oman as well. The critics aren't they supposed to look at that logical point of view that yes, they need to defend themselves, and defending themselves is defending their borders?
Of course, obviously, in war, unfortunately, there's always going to be tragedy and error. But at the same time, the Arab coalition has taken very strong steps to ensure that precision is always a key component of the operation itself. They will always strive to get the most in-depth intel before conducting any sort of operation. And actually, just from the beginning of the conflict itself, we saw that communication play a key role within the operation. You see this with the regular briefs that is occurring from the Saudi military, and there is actually a push for transparency in terms of reporting on what is occurring in Yemen, because there's always going to be, like you said, the criticism that wants to sort of negate any efforts to resolve the issue itself. So on this level, communication and transparency has actually been very developed for this conflict, and the Arab coalition actually is striving even further to maintain this line of communication so the people understand what is happening on the ground.
Yeah. We've talked about this, and you've mentioned it just a minute ago. The Arab coalition does not only help fight the Iran-backed Houthis, but
Yes.
they also provide huge contributions when it comes to the humanitarian aspects, as well as the humanitarian aid to those affected by the war. How does the help that they are providing ease the standards of living for the people in Yemen?
Well, of course, the war is actually very difficult. It's affected millions within the country, and the GCC, being the culturally embedded within the Yemeni people, have a certain fondness for the people, and this is, of course, the humanitarian deliveries actually occurs on a much more personal level for them. So you see more efforts to deliver humanitarian aids to these regions. But like I said before, because of different interfering forces from Iran and how they've supplied arms to the Houthi rebels, are deterring these humanitarian shipments, which is unfortunate, because really when you have Iranian ballistic missiles going in the hands of Houthi rebels, and they're targeting vessels from the GCC states or from the United States, this shows clearly that the Houthis intend to really negatively affect their own people as well, that they're not allowing aid to reach to their borders. And this is, of course, a travesty, and unfortunately this is the reality on the ground.
Something that a lot of people are looking forward to, especially here in the GCC, is the move from being a council to being a union. Yes. I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Ms. Bianco. How would such a move transform the Arabian Gulf?
Well, just from a fundamental level, it would streamline GCC decision-making process, and where you have mechanisms that can actually develop policies that suits all the 6 GCC member states on that intimate level would be a tremendous achievement on any standards, really. And not only that, I think on the global scale as well, if the world sees the success of the GCC or of the Gulf Union and how it can actually create a very formidable regional presence that can deter Iran and in its intervening behavior, people might have more faith in international organizations again, because in this day and age, we see a lot of backlash from the international community towards these international organizations. And the GCC, if it's able to successfully implement a comprehensive union, and it could actually set an example for the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm. The GCC union would not only affect the GCC, but also the surrounding Arab states. How can you tell us, how is their position stronger if they're as a union and fighting the challenges in the broader region of our northern neighbors?
Well, it would definitely rest assured all the Gulf states will have a common policies and mechanisms for defense, for politics, for economics, for energy. And it will create a very substantial new player within the field, a much more developed, much more cohesive player. And even though if there are some slight deviations between the members, I think they can set that aside and just pursue the interest that is common within all the members. And of course, this will alter the strategic landscape of the region, because with increasing uncertainty from this region internationally, there will be a formidable force that safeguards stability, that safeguards security for this region. And it being situated in a very geostrategic location is even more paramount, that stability is delivered through such a cohesive union, which is what the Gulf states are trying to achieve.
My final question to you is, now in deterring these criticisms internationally, we have seen a lot of efforts by our foreign ministers all over the GCCs, our own one here in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia and so on. Is that the best way to go against these criticisms, by discussing them, talking about them transparently, or is there something else that you might want to add on to that?
Well, like I said before, transparency has always been at the forefront of the Arab coalition. So this is just a continuation of this very positive policy. So when you see ministers that are actually engaging in dialogue, engaging in discussions about conditions in Yemen, you can see this is reflecting, and it's very authentic efforts to achieve communication and to address any sort of criticism. Because if we are not honest with ourselves, within the international community cannot take us for realistically as well. So at least the GCC has developed their communication strategies in terms of reporting and discussing the events occurring in Yemen and in the region as well.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, the relations among Gulf Cooperation Council countries are based on mutual history and shared destiny. And thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next episode of Inside Edition.